Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Still with you on today's edition of Cairo Local Time. And of course, as promised earlier today, we discussed Egypt's participation and President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's participation in the G7 summit that he recently attended. And of course, I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon in the studio by my guest, Dr. Tamer Rodi, Head of the Economics Department, Faculty of Commerce, Main Chance University. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us this afternoon. Doctor, now Egypt enjoys strong ties relatively with the G7 countries, in addition to its leadership of the African Union in this current phase. How do you read the importance of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's participation in the round of G7 summit this time?
Well, that was a very important visit for the first part, of course, because he represents, in this particular case, the voice of the African Union for this summit meeting. Yes. And he has relayed some really important messages in his opening speech. It was a very comprehensive, very inclusive message that I can very well say it is a roadmap for the future of the African Union and its cooperation with the European Union in general and with the G7 countries in particular. I guess he laid out the goals for the African Union. He also laid out the opportunities that the African countries have to offer, and more importantly, he laid out all the problems that the African Union can face achieving those long-term goals.
What stood out, Doctor, for you in his opening speech?
Well, then the goals were very clear to the rest of the world. One, for example, is that goes with the theme of the G7 meeting this year. He started his speech by saying we want to achieve more income equality. And the theme for the G7 this year deals more with income equality. Now, let me remind you that the G7, as 7 countries, they represent almost 40% of the world GDP, but 10% of its population. So then that theme is very important.
Very unequal.
Yes, you know, it reflects kind of that theme, inequalities, you know. So, and in Africa, we were looking for more productive ideas, more productive opportunities, more investment opportunities, more free trade opportunities, and we want market for our exports. So when he says we want more equality, which goes with the theme of the G7, of course, he's implying, you know, let us penetrate more your markets, open up your markets, and help us with the flow of investment and so on. That was, of course, very remarkable. And then went on to elaborate that in the long term, we want to achieve a real, meaningful, sustainable development with all the problems associating it. I personally thought it was a very comprehensive speech that even can help us in teaching. You know, it summarizes all the problems, goals, and objectives of the economy for the African Union countries in the next years.
Dr. Tamer, now, do you see a shift in how G7 countries, for example, look at Africa? It is no longer a case where Africa is a source of raw material or an easy source of raw material. Do you see that they've changed the way that they're dealing with African countries, no longer just exploiting their raw materials, trying to work towards infrastructure, industrialization, developing, as you said, sustainably African countries?
Indeed, yes, it is the case. And it does not just limit itself to how the European Union looks or the G7. It also goes to China and other nations that are interested in Africa. And the common say was always that it's an interest motivated by the look for natural resources. But if you look on the ground and you look at where the foreign direct investment goes in Africa, a considerable but not large percentage goes into the oil sector, the mineral sector, mining, and so on. But the majority of it for the last few years, a considerable sum has been directed towards infrastructure. Now again, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has expressed this in his speech by saying, so many things are happening now. It is a huge market. Africa represents about almost approaching 1.3 billion people. That's a huge market. And he referred to infrastructure investment, and he has referred to the massive amount abundance of human capital as well. So that's why I'm saying it was a very, very inclusive speech.
Yes, it really touched on several topics. Also in his speech, the president tackled issues related to fighting corruption, women empowerment, improving education opportunities in Africa, building on economic development in Africa. How do you think these issues directly relate to sustainable development, which is the main objective, as you said?
Well, of course, those are incredibly relevant issues for the case of sustainable development. What you want to achieve as sustainable development is a very high, reliable, honest degree of governance. And of course, you need empowerment of women, and you need to live a healthy life in general that goes along not just on the health issues, but also with good education. And the president referred to that. And he referred to that this coincides, of course, with the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030, and it also refers to the 2063 vision decided by the African Union. So by putting them both together and showing to the whole G7 summit that they all coincide together, we have a joint look, the 2030, the 2063, and then he referred to the very first summit on fighting anti-corruption in Africa, which took place in 2019 in Sharm el-Sheikh, one of many to come. And that is a very powerful summit that showed to the whole world the unity of African nations into fighting corruption.
Indeed. Dr. Tamer, we spoke a lot about sustainable development in the African continent, Egypt's leadership of the African Union. Also, President Sisi held several meetings on the sidelines of the G7 summit, first of which was with the French President Emmanuel Macron. And they also spoke about developed or bilateral ties between Egypt and France. How do you see that in the development between the two nations?
It has been for long that the relationship between Egypt and the European Union countries has been very strong on the economic side. And visits like this, summits like this in particular, the G7, those are summits that are really non-binding, but what they really offer is a chance for presidents to meet. And in this case, voicing the African Union in general and Egypt in particular, it is a very good chance for the president to meet with other presidents and think of more ties economically. We have a very solid commercial relationship with France and with Italy and with Germany, but Italy and France stand up, of course, and the opportunities for the years to come, with the flow of investment reviving back to what it was before the revolution, and tourism flourishing, GDP growth rate is increasing. There is a whole interest from businessmen, European businessmen from France and other countries as well, to reinvest in Egypt.
Indeed. And also the president met with the US President Donald Trump, and Trump said he was admiring Egypt under the leadership of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and looking forward to further developing cooperation. And Egypt has changed its original stance on how it deals with partnership with specific countries and more diversification when it comes to partnership. How do you see this move?
Well, it was obvious in the speech. In the speech, the president insisted on, well, we want African solutions for African problems.
Yes.
And he said he is open to cooperate with the rest of the world, not just as Egypt, as voicing Africa as well, and with no preconditions politically. So diversification is there. He wants cooperation based on mutual benefit. President Trump has, for the many last years, praised the Egyptians for the economy, for what they took in the economy. Let me tell you that what happened here in the last few years, an extensive, aggressive economic reform program that some of the IMF experts, some of the World Bank experts were amazed that Egypt had the power
ability, yes.
and to carry it on. And we did carry it on.
Indeed. Also, the president met with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and Italian Prime Minister Conte. Do you see, since you mentioned the success of the Egyptian economic reform program, as an indication to such countries as Germany and Italy and France and the US, that Egypt is now capable of things it wasn't capable of before on the economic files?
Yes. Now, if you look at the Egyptian economy prior to 2010, and let me go a little bit further, prior to 2008, the economy has developed rapidly in a very amazing fashion from 2004 to 2008. We had a 7.2% growth rate. That's a very high growth rate we have not achieved since way so many years. And the way it developed an attraction to foreign direct investment, which tripled, quadrupled within the years 2000 to 2008, prior to the financial crisis. If it proves anything, it proves that Egypt has the ability and the attraction to foreign investors. Just give it a chance. Now, what happened between 2012 2019 is exactly the same. And if we look at it, you were growing at 1.8% in 2012. That was the GDP growth rate. Your unemployment increased from 9.5%. It almost reached at some quarters 14%. Your inflation went up from 8 and 9% all the way to 35%. And now when you look at the numbers, the complete reverse of that course. Your unemployment went down below what it was 2010. There is indications that foreign direct investment started again to flow. We've made $6 billion this year so far. When you look at the growth rate, that 1.8 in 2012 is now approaching 5.7. And I am sure that the rest of the world is seeing this also with an eye that it is all happening with the proper set of economic reform policies. Now, that makes it very attractive for foreign investors.
And also in quite a short period of time.
And a very quite short period of time.
Because usually these changes, we are talking about 30 years, you need a long period of time.
We've been talking about economic reforms since the 1990s. What happened within the last 3 or 4 years is unimaginable.
And this has led the Egyptian economy to stand back up on its feet and further empowered Egypt to really undertake in national projects, mega projects. And I wanted to talk to you about the issue of mega projects and national projects. This is another economic opportunity for development of the Egyptian economy. Tell me how these projects and how, for example, the President's participation in the G7 summit is a window for further information to these countries on the opportunities available back home.
He made it very, very clear in his speech. He said that the African markets are changing, not just a huge population anymore, not just a huge market, but also countries with investment in infrastructure. And there is nowhere to demonstrate this except when you look, or more powerful than when you look at what happened in Egypt. The amount of infrastructure projects that happened here within the last 4 years probably did not take place in the last 30. May that be in transportation and in particular in the energy sector. We were a country in which electricity was not enough to sustain the industry.
Our own consumption, yes.
Right? Now we are producing an excess of electricity. And that also happened within a very short number of years. Investment in energy, in infrastructure, and in human capital. That will continue also, those set of investment has produced a rapid change in the Egyptian economy, as it is expected to produce way much more, because such investment usually lags in its benefit. Give it few more years before you see the impact of such projects.
So it's long-term projects.
It's always a long-term project.
And Egypt, heading the African Union, is really a windowway or a doorway for European and Asian countries to come through to other African countries, not just to Egypt, but to trickle down across the African continent. How do you see Egypt playing a productive role in that file?
Well, that's again a very positive success, positive transformation from what happened before the revolution. For some years, Egypt was not really an incredibly active member of the African Union. What you feel now is Egypt is highly focused, highly concentrated on the African Union issues, facing development as one entity. And again, the President has expressed this in the speech and referred to the 2063 African Union goals, which is economic integration, one free trade area, one whole united nation rather than independent nations. And it is a shift in the Egyptian policy, and it indicates a focus in the right direction.
Indeed. The President also often speaks about this issue of achieving regional and continental integration. And he's often spoken and encouraged African countries to use both the private and public sectors to reach this goal. How do you see Egypt's encouragement and the importance of such a goal of regional and continental integration?
Well, again, this is the language of the new world economy that we live in. If you look anywhere in the world around you, in America, North America, you have the North American Free Trade Area Agreement. If you look in Europe, you have the European Union, in Asia, in the Gulf states. So regional integration now is a means of increasing economic efficiency, increasing exports, of developing all together. In economic development science, we call this the look to south trade. If we look at our relationship with the West in general when it comes to commerce, you will find most of those African nations individually directs their exports to European countries, and their imports come from European countries, and very little trade in between them. Regional integration will increase trade, give opportunities for local industries to expand.
Absolutely. One final question,
Sure.
Doctor. President Sisi, of course, arrived in the Japanese capital to take part in the Tokyo International Conference for African Development, TICAD. Very important conference taking place, and in attendance, of course, of several leaders from African countries, etc. How do you see TICAD at boosting investment and trade ties between now Japan and African countries?
Well, Asia has always been a player, let that be China or Japan, of course. Japan has started this initiative from the mid-90s, I guess 1993 or so. And every year they would host this summit, and it is a great coincidence that it comes right after the G7. So it sends a message that while you are improving your ties with the European Union, with the G7, and then with the Far East countries as well, represented in Japan. And if I can remind you, very few months ago, there was the African Forum in China.
Yes. Indeed. Right, Dr. Tamer Rodi, the head of the Economics Department, Faculty of Commerce from Ain Shams University. I'd like to thank you very much, Doctor, for coming in. Thank you very much for your time and all your insights.
Very welcome.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we've run out of time, and that wraps up today's edition of Cairo Local Time. We do hope you have enjoyed it. You're in the company of myself, Angie Meher. Many thanks for watching.